I'm presenting my chosen ethical decision-making model for approval from my supervisor before taking my determined action to address this dilemma. This is the case of the insistent teacher. The key concerns within this scenario is that I am taking on dual roles, which is a consultant to teachers as well as an advisor to students. A key concern that Mrs. Ambers has raised is Riley's mental health and home life circumstances. I'm also concerned with staff integrity. For example, Mrs. Ambers and my colleague, career practitioner, have been sharing information about students in terms of whether or not they've been attending sessions and whether or not that is a breach of privacy and confidentiality. I'm also concerned with the confidentiality of my client, as he has specifically stated he does not want any information to be shared with Mrs. Ambers in terms of his career decision making. I'm also concerned about the student diversity within Mrs. Ambers' class, as Riley is considered a minority due to his cultural background. The main ethical dilemma is that there's a conflict between professional competencies and the code of ethics within the CICA professional standards, particularly between the responsibility to preserve the client's right to privacy and work cooperatively and respectfully with team members to create a healthy and productive work environment where team members are kept informed. I have chosen a model of ethical decision making by Erich, Kimber, Millwater and Cranston, created in 2011. As you can see in figure 1, this is a visual diagram of the model. It shows that it isn't linear, it's circular, and that all of the stages are interrelated. I chose this model because it's aimed at employees working within a school setting, because it's developed from research from school leaders and teachers within Australia. These include scenarios where employees experience pressure from administration, which would breach their professional ethics, which relates very much to the situation that I am in. It caters to the complexity and multi-layered variables within this particular ethical dilemma, as the model acknowledges interconnecting forces. It takes on this perspective of education being heavily value-laden. It includes perspective of different stakeholders that are directly and indirectly impacted by the dilemma. And it allows, during the decision-making process, to contemplate alternative choices and a reflection for the implications of these different choices. So the first part involves the critical incident. This part allows me to identify the exact incident that triggers the ethical dilemma. The incident in this scenario is when my principal indicates that I am to work with Mrs. Ambers to support the student. This creates a conflict between my ethical responsibility to keep the client's information private and my responsibility professionally to adhere to administration requests. Part 2 involves the competing forces within this ethical dilemma, and as you can see, there are many. The sections within these competing forces are professional ethics, legal issues or policies, organizational culture, institutional context, public interest, society and community, global context, political framework, economic and financial context, and as well as the unknown area, which are future forces that may occur, and I've considered duty of care being one of them. So there are many competing forces in here that I have contemplated to inform my decision-making process. Part 3 is personal values, beliefs, and ethical orientations. I've created my own little code of ethics. I acknowledge that I'm a young Australian female with an Australian English heritage and a Catholic religion, which influences my values, beliefs, and ethical orientation. So some of these include my belief that everyone has a right to privacy. It takes a village to raise a child, which is about collaboration, as well as adhering to rules and laws of society within employment. So this ethical dilemma is particularly conflicting for me because I do really strongly believe in confidentiality, collaboration, and adhering to expectations of my employer. Part 4 involves the choice making of this model. So there are many different alternative choices that can be taken for this dilemma. The two main ones are adhering to the principal's request and disclosing information to Mrs. Ambers about Riley for the purpose of collaboration, or refusing to share private information with Mrs. Ambers about Riley to maintain client confidentiality. But between the two of those, I believe that it's possible to take several actions in order to encourage collaboration as well as maintain the client's confidentiality. So I will be taking several steps. A few of those are immediate steps as well as steps in the future. So my immediate steps are informing the principal of the student request not to share the information, and that ignoring this request may not be within the best interest of the student. I would also consult with the career practitioner colleague that is on maternity leave just to gain more insight about how she dealt with her caseload previously. I'd consult with Riley about Mrs. Amber's request to know whether he's attending sessions and create a very clear outline of information that can and cannot be shared to Mrs. Ambers, just to ensure that I'm being transparent with Riley and keeping him informed. I'm going to document all the actions that I take for legal obligations. The next steps upon completing those 4, depending on the outcomes of those steps, will be to meet with Mrs. Ambers and acknowledge my personal actions that should have been taken prior to this conflict occurring before it all got out of hand, and potentially developing a professional relationship with her and drawing on her experience and skills. Potentially making a referral to the school guidance counsellor if Riley's well-beings do become a bigger concern, and documenting any information that Riley shares in regards to home life for reporting purposes based on Mrs. Amber's concerns. There are many implications that can or cannot arise from these decisions that are for both myself, the organisation, and the community. I've considered the positive and negative implications within those 3. And although we cannot tell the future, we can sort of infer what the consequences could be. So, for example, within the individual implications, I might potentially resolve the conflict with Mrs. Ambers, or she may not accept the form of compromise through our conversation, and that in itself might create further ethical dilemmas that I will need to deal with. After that, after making the decisions within the model, I met with a group of colleagues as they are an important source of learning and a part of the process for gaining professional identity and development. And we analysed our individual concerns as well as our concerns that we shared as a whole. And we came up with 4 best practice points, which are outlined here. And these conversations really helped me to identify competing forces that I hadn't acknowledged prior to collaborating with them. And it also allowed me to think about the perspectives of other people involved in this decision, as well as my initial reactions of the situation. And one of the main things was that the more I collaborated and the more that I followed this decision-making model, I was able to remove my emotions and think logically within this decision-making process. So, in summary, I have found following this decision making model that there's no clear cut answer, and what constitutes as ethical behavior is likely to lie in a grey zone, which is very much what my decision is encompassing. And many dilemmas, particularly for teachers, aren't really solvable and they must simply be managed rather than resolved. So, my final decision involves taking several actions in order to address the dilemma implicitly and explicitly and ensure that minimal harm is caused and that all stakeholders are reasonably content. And student confidentiality will hold a higher significance over collaboration. My questions are for future development. What is the best course of action to support Riley's wellbeing in terms of potential referral to other professionals and taking a mental health approach to career development, as well as what is considered best practice when collaborating with other professionals in response to a student that aren't qualified career practitioners? So, my plan for development is to consult with other career practitioners, particularly experienced ones that have shared similar situations to this, and undertaking training for specialised competencies such as working with diverse people and applying career counselling skills. I'll also use reflection as a process of professional development. And these are the references of literature that I have used within my decision making process to help me come up with my final decision.